Viewers and subscribers, welcome to another segment of InfoWars Jamaica. So, viewers and subscribers, we're going to take a look at the Jamaica Defense Force, when it was formed, what it was before, what it was being used for, and what it's being used for now. The Jamaica Defense Force descended from the British West Indian Regiment. That's right, so it wasn't called the JDF, it was called the British West India Regiment. Now, this was formed in the colonial era. So basically, the West India Regiment was extensively used by the British in policing the empire from 1795 to 1926. So another thing is that there were other units inside the JDF heritage, and they were called the Jamaica Militia and the Kingston Infantry Volunteers. Now, these Kingston Infantry Volunteers, they were the ones that went into World War I and reorganized into the Jamaican Infantry Volunteers in World War II. So yeah, we had Jamaicans in World War I and World War II fighting under the British flag. Isn't that amazing? So when you read all those books about World War I and World War II and all those movies, in the back of your mind, you're like, man, we had nothing to do with that. Well, you got it wrong. Yes, we had something to do with it. Jamaicans were there too. And I just want to point out that the West India Regiment was reformed in 1958 as part of the West Indies Federation. So a brief history of the West Indies Federation is that it was formed in January 1958 to May 1962. So basically, it had various islands in the Caribbean that were colonized under the UK, including Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Jamaica, and those on the Leeward and Windward Islands. They all came together to form the Federation, with its capital in the port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. The express intention of the Federation was to create a political unit that would become independent from Britain as a single state. Now, it's important to state that Norman Manley was the caretaker for this brainchild of having all the Caribbean islands under one flag. And when Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica could not see eye to eye over the power struggle, the Federation plan failed. And when it failed, the army, which was the West India Regiment, was split into two. So one side went to Trinidad and Tobago, which exists to this day, and the other half went to Jamaica, and it was called the JDF. So again, after Norman Manley failed to have Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean unified under the Federation plan, the West Indian Regiment was absorbed, and the battalion was split into two between Trinidad and Tobago and the Jamaica Regiment. So, as the name Defense Force implies, these forces are still too small to invade anybody. Virtually none of them at independence included naval and air elements. But when the air wing and the naval elements were formed, they were put under the umbrella of the Defense Force. Now, the Jamaica Defense Force doesn't have an air force. It has an air wing of the Defense Force, which is considered a support arm. The JDF is too small to have separate services. In other words, the Navy and Air are branches of the Army. So in black and white, the Army, which is the Jamaica Defense Force, was mainly created to offset the cost of having the English Empire main troops coming to the island to restrain rebellions or revolts against the crown. So what they did was they created a native army that was self-sustained and well trained to combat any threats against the crown. So, viewers and subscribers, they say if you want to know the present, you got to look into the past. And you can see that the empire and also the governor from the colonial era, they were using the military to police the citizens, from slaves to free people. So right now, in modern day 2020, you have the government going back to those days, that type of principle of having the military being used as the everyday policing force to keep the peace in the island. So this habit of deploying troops in non-emergency situations is a worrying one, and critics both within and outside the military fear that the armed forces are becoming political tools. As I stated earlier, in years past, calling in the military used to be seen as an acknowledgement that state institutions are incapable of doing their jobs. Meaning that, like back then, when the only time you'd have the Navy come in after ships, was when slaves would rebel around the island. They weren't in the streets every day walking around. That's how the crown used to use the army. But nowadays, elected governments present these operations as a way of doing something about the country's public security crisis, and not as a reflection of their own failures. Even more important is the fact that the military's frequent deployments in issues of public security have never had more than a short-term impact on crime and violence. It is frequently said by citizens that once the troops withdrew from the garrisons where the crime is being spiked, everything returns to being just like before. What's more, the armed forces' capacities do have their limits. If there indeed was a wave of strikes, right, by the JCF across the country, Jamaica's authorities would not be able to send troops to every corner of the island. So instead of relying increasingly on the military, it's high time to address the fundamental problems in the law enforcement sector. As always, YouTube subscribers and viewers, thanks for watching the video. Share, like, and subscribe.